today. Tanya, do you want to say hello? I know you'll be on the call.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. Just here to provide some technical support and yeah. Hi, guys.
Great. And thanks also to you, Jennifer, for getting us started today. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. My colleague Dave that just said hello always likes to start with a cartoon. And so this was kind of in in respect to him. But, today we're going to talk about just at the very basic level, why you need data and how your LE can help. Your local evaluator can help with that, and what kinds of data that you have and that you need and that you can collect that will help you in your prevention efforts. So as we get started, we're going to just do a chat flurry. So I'm going to ask the first question, and my colleague Liz is going to just read out the answers. We have a pretty small group here today, so if you have questions during, I feel very comfortable with you just taking yourself off mute. Also, one of the PIRE staff, and we'll also keep an eye on the chat if you prefer that way. So just feel free to stop us if you have questions throughout the presentation. So the first question we want to ask is, what's your favorite evaluation activity that you do in your work or have done in the past? So type it in the chat, and when I say go, you'll all submit at the same time. A minute to type your favorite evaluation activity that you've done or currently do. Couple words. All right, get ready and press send.
Focus groups, that was mine. My favorite is conducting interviews, revisiting what was effective. Interesting, good. Anyone else? Interviews and surveys. Working with community.
Interviews are my favorite.
Yeah, I like this. A lot of engagement with folks directly about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Time for the second question. What has been one of the biggest challenges for you personally with evaluation? All right. Type your answer in the chat and I'll say send in just a minute. Biggest challenge for you personally with evaluation? Okay. 1, 2, 3, send.
Ooh, and as an evaluator, having the agencies collect data consistently. Remembering to do it after an activity. Getting data back, determining what the data means, where to look for the data you need. Surveys. All those indeed have been challenging.
Yes. All right, last one. What do you expect evaluation could do? What are your hopes and dreams for evaluation? I'll put it restate it. What do you expect evaluation could do? Sorry about that. This one's tricky, so I'll give you an extra 30 seconds. Tricky, but no right or wrong answers. All right, 1, 2, 3, send.
Ooh, okay. Where do we go? Determine, help with process. Determine if the program efforts plan was executed effectively. Determine the impact of strategies and help improve them. Help guide program direction.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for that feedback first thing. We have some things that we think are useful for everyone who's using and conducting evaluation. And we'll also keep these things in mind as we go through the training as well. So we appreciate your feedback on that. And thank you so much, Liz, for helping with that activity.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce a couple of members of our team who also joined in. Marisa Diaz, who was not going to be able to join us today, is able to join us. So she's on the call. I think a lot of you know her email very well and her face from data collection trainings, and she manages our community survey efforts. And Cristina Lopez Gutierrez is also on the PIRE team, as well as managing her own local evaluation contracts. So I just wanted to give a shout out to our other team members.
Thank you so much. I can't see the pictures of folks as they're added, so I really appreciate that. Okay, well, so here's what we're going to talk about today. What your local evaluators do, program evaluation, fidelity, reliability, norms and values, the kinds of evaluation that OSAP uses, prevention evaluations and tools, how you make an evaluation plan, and as a closing, we're going to close out with an activity. We'll end this presentation early. We'll close out with an activity that you can submit. We'll have office hours like during the training, and you can work on that with the remainder of your training time, and then you're done after you finish that. So we wanted to make sure, to say that we did design this training for new OSAP preventionists. Just looking, I glanced over at the names. Not all of you are new. In fact, a lot of you have a lot of evaluation experience, and some of you are local evaluators. So some of this might not be new for you. A lot of this might not be new for you. But for you old timers, as we'll call you, we're thrilled that you're here, really, and just want to recognize your unique experience, especially with local evaluation. Jump in, add examples, give us your feedback. We would love to, all benefit from your expertise there. And also just recognize that in terms of, with the pandemic, there's been, and the great resignation and labor shortages, you as local evaluators really also hold a lot of that institutional history. And, we'll talk more about that later, but just really wanted to lift up that experience that you bring and hope that you'll feel comfortable also contributing to this training. We also, just a note about terminology, we tried not to be jargony in this presentation, but, it's like we try not to be jargony, but we're also, we are the jargon. So if there's something you don't understand, please stop us, write something in the chat, unmute yourself. We want to make sure that you're understanding as we go through. Okay. All right. So, evaluation, we have, a definition here. It's really, we're looking at it as an ongoing process. We collectively use the strategic prevention framework, or the SPIF model, to take a look at how the program is working by collecting and analyzing information based on the activities that we're doing at the local level. So we also look at, process, we look at results and outcomes, so that we have an idea of how the program's doing, and ways in which we might want to augment that success or make improvements, and most importantly, make decisions about next steps. So I mentioned part of the SPIF model, as you know, it's an ongoing continuous process, and evaluation is part of each one of these steps of the SPIF process. So that's different, I know, than like I learned in school. And, some people talk about evaluations at the end of something, but the SPIF process requires us to use evaluation and use data in each one of these steps. So you want to be looking at things and how things are going along the way, looking at your activities and benchmarks and other important markers that you have to gauge how things are going. how they're being received, how effective they are, within your communities. So also, evaluation is quite broad. It's not just a survey at the end, right? And so you may already be doing some evaluation activities under a different name, under a pseudonym, and maybe not even realize it, right? So it doesn't always have to look like this formal process of a survey, of the New Mexico Community Survey. Yes, that's an evaluation activity, but that's not the only one that you're using. After today, we hope that you will be able to also identify some additional things that you're already doing that are evaluation, and also, how you can set up information and tools so that you're making the decisions at the community level, that you're making them more intentionally, and that those decisions are more data driven. So for a long time, we know that there is not a lot of science behind substance use prevention. We have this Nancy Reagan just say no. I know that I grew up in this era, and I was completely prepared for everyone in a dark corner to offer me drugs, to which I could scream no and run the other way. I was actually kind of disappointed. I was so prepared that I was actually a little disappointed when I never got to actually use the skill, right? And we know that like prevention education, around 40 years ago is when we started applying that data, to the scientific process, and saying, in the same way we know things about gravity, right? We can also know things about what works in prevention education. And this was really a shift in, multiple fields, psychology, economics, et cetera. So as the field of prevention evolved, so did evaluation in New Mexico. I, like Dave, am not a New Mexico resident. I am really impressed by the evaluation that's going on in New Mexico. I think that the ways in which decisions are data-driven already is really remarkable, and just want to say that off the bat, like, y'all are doing great. Everything can always be better. Y'all are doing great. And that's from a Southerner, and I use y'all intentionally there. So, we try to be on the forefront of evaluation efforts in the state. So, counting number of participants, looking at social media likes, looking at engagement, describing and promoting the need for programming and resources. And really, we want to include all of those factors in our prevention, evaluation. So you have, on the slide about, the different things that you can use, common sense theory and data driven. So, we're moving more towards, we always want to have theory and common sense, but then the data driven is something we'll be talking about today. So there's some misperceptions about evaluation and data. I think it might be fun. I'm surprising my PIRE colleagues with this. It might be fun if we each took a turn reading one, if you feel comfortable doing that. But these are all things that we've heard, and maybe likely you've heard as well. So I'll start off with the first one, and then maybe, I don't know, Dave, you might want to read the second one, and then Liz and Marisa and Christina, if you don't mind. So the first, misperception. So we don't need evaluation because I already use an evidence-based program. Dave?
Sure, and I'll say good morning at this point. Then read the second one, which is we don't need to evaluate this program because it's new and there's no established evidence base for it.
Awesome, thanks.
We can't evaluate this program because of language or cultural barriers with my population.
Yeah.
Evaluation outcomes are tied to your funding, as in if you don't reach your objectives, you won't get refunded.
Yeah. Christina, are you somewhere that you want to read this one? The next?
Yes, I was refilling mine. Excuse me, survey data aren't good for prevention evaluation since everyone underreports.
And I'll read the last one. When participants like a program, it's effective. And if they like it, then they're accepting of it. In the chat, right, if you've heard other kinds of misperceptions about evaluation and data, here's, write them take a minute to write those in the chat. We seeing anything here, Liz? Oh, I didn't do a good job because the outcomes are not what I expected. Yes, that's such a good one. Thanks, Valerie.
We're going to include some of these in our next presentation.
Yeah. You don't use this information.
Ooh,
Yep.
good one.
All right. While you're thinking through, this, we revisit with another cartoon. We don't want to make ashes out of ourselves. So, maybe the people in Pompeii didn't see the signs and relied on beliefs alone. Right. And so, I think what's tricky is that each of these misperceptions here, I think reflects like, we're not just making fun. I think all of these reflect real concerns about how can we use the data? How can we better use the data? What happens if we collect data and just sits? What should we do then? And so it's not to stigmatize, the concerns that we have about the effort that it takes to collect and use data, but really try to make that process more seamless and make it part of your just like everyday prevention activities. All right. So you might be thinking, why am I even here if we have a local evaluator? Local evaluators have so much expertise, and we talked about that institutional history of which to draw upon. And we're going to be talking more about this in the presentation, but, we want to just, what you should ask of your local evaluator, what you can ask of your local evaluator, and what you probably should ask of your local evaluator. So in this presentation, we're also going to be talking about ways in which we, that you'll be doing some stuff and the ways in which you can work proactively with your local evaluators.
So who's the cat, Ashley?
This is actually not my personal cat. I prefer to do presentations with animal slides because I find that they're very disarming. And cats are so expressive, and dogs. Well, animals are so expressive. So this is a cat contorting, trying to find the data all by herself. And in fact, if the cat was just working with her local evaluator, you might see her with a, bit of a more relaxed posture here.
Love it.
All right. And so I'll let, especially the PIRE folks that are LEs talk about how awesome you are. But since I know that they're kind of modest people, I'll just start off by saying that the local evaluators are awesome and that they're really, they also provide local technical assistance for data-driven and evidence-based implementation. They build capacity and often provide support in assessment, reporting, and fidelity and implementation issues. Also, they're really familiar with the research and best practices. You may know that local evaluators meet regularly with us at PIRE, where we discuss sort of high-level ways in which we can implement and use research in local work, and also can help you decipher OSAP, the things that OSAP is asking you to do through your statement of works and, and other things, and ways to get information to evaluate your success towards that. Anything else that local evaluators want to, I know that local evaluators serve a lot of roles. Anything else local evaluators would like to say about things that they regularly do in their communities?
One of the things that I often do is when I participate in coalition meetings to kind of help build that capacity around the research behind the particular strategies that people are doing. So, and sometimes the local evaluator is the bad guy who can kind of guide people back into the right direction, I think. And so sometimes I've asked my programs to use me in that function to help redirect some of the very well-intentioned interests of coalition members and community members and back into line with the data-driven process that we're trying to do.
All right. Well, so who are these local cool OSAP evaluators? You know, we at PIRE had a fun time trying to figure out which of the following, you know, on the right we personally were and which ones we identified with. But so we have a list of the OSAP evaluators on the left. We've got our PIRE team on the right. And, you know, for fun, you could think about who you feel like you connect with. There's so many personalities. I think Liz, yeah, she's definitely, well, which dot? It's maybe the third row, far left. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. All right. So OSAP's expectations of local evaluators, you know, so they're working with you, and then they're also, you know, working with OSAP to complete an annual evaluation plan, lead data collection and evaluating each strategy and intervention, contributing to and reviewing periodic reports, assisting the programs in identifying strategies and rationales for implementation, assisting the program in identifying appropriate indicators to measure strategy progress, including benchmark indicator achievement and process data. They also attend OSAP recipient meetings, and on the New Mexico nmprevention.org website, I encourage you, there's like a ton of really useful stuff there. And one of them is the OSAP approved LE expectations. And you can kind of take a look there. And, you know, as you're thinking about, you know, what do I ask my local evaluator? How can I build a stronger working alliance with my local evaluator? You know, that might give you some ideas as well. They're also, you know, experts in SMART documents and, you know, reviewing periodic reports. There's just a lot of different ways in which you can, you know, local evaluators work with training and technical assistance for their communities.
Ashley, I just want to jump in that Ardina mentioned, and this is linked to this slide as well as the previous one, but local evaluators help us stay on task and take a look where we are accomplishing our goals. You got that. And Valerie reinforced how evaluators can provide background and history regarding different county programs or projects, which is providing history and context, and it's super helpful when there's staff turnover. Yeah, we can be the ones who say, like, yeah, we tried that a few years ago and this is what happened. So yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and I want to give just a shout out to the local evaluators on the call. If you don't mind just taking yourself off mute, and maybe we could start with you, Liz, since you're already unmuted, and Christina. And then I noticed a couple of other local evaluators, I think, that are on the call. So just maybe say hello and what communities you are serving.
Yeah, well, I started with the SPIF SIG way back when as a local evaluator for the southwest part of the state. And then when there were 4 counties, I've maintained in close contact with them. But for the last about 10 years, I've been the local evaluator for Rocky Mountain Youth Corps in Taos, and as well as under the PFS, the SPIF RX grant with the Health Equity Council here in Bernalillo County. I will pass it to Christina, who's my next one on the screen.
Good morning. I support the Southern region, currently under CHI, although I've been working in the region for with those counties under different fiscal entities, and that means Hidalgo County, Grant County, Luna, Doñana, and Sierra. So now they're all housed under the Center for Health Innovation, but I'm the Southern girl.
All right. Other evaluators on the call? Liz and Christina can help me scan. Thought I had seen some, but maybe not.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Hello.
Oh, there. Yeah, there you go.
I'm an evaluator. I work for Cindy Sackerman. I work with 2 communities currently on 2 projects. So one is the Native American Community Academy here in Albuquerque, and the other one is A Chance of a Lifetime in Santa Fe.
Thank you. Welcome. Anybody else?
Hi, excuse me. Sorry, I'm Allison. I also work with AIDA. I work with a few different communities, but the OSAP program I work with is the Kiowa Santo Domingo reservation.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Allison. Anybody else? Okay, so we talked about what you can work with your LEs on. So we also, here's what LEs are not expected to do. So, typically local evaluators try to stay out of the role of program management, unless there's some kind of explicit agreement between the communities and the local evaluators. That's part of it. We have seen issues at the state level. We have seen issues when evaluators cross the lines of program management. It's hard to evaluate something that you're also managing unless you're really thoughtful about those connections. So that's one of the things that we just it's not a red flag, but maybe like a yellowish flag to consider, that separating that role. Managing staff or contractors, being the sole keeper of your data. So the data belongs to the communities, and so local evaluators are fair and expecting also some buy-in from the communities about the data, collecting the data, using the data, keeping the data. So that's a conversation, if you haven't had with your local evaluator, you could have. Also, local evaluators are incredibly supportive. We see the writing of local evaluators on reports and things like that. They are not expected to be the primary author and submit the reports. OSAP draws a pretty clear boundary about, their contract is with the community and not with the evaluator. You hire the evaluator. So, doing that work together is not only going to satisfy OSAP, but it ultimately would be more, sort of keep everybody on the same page and more satisfying and useful to you. Same with communicating directly with OSAP. I know that each community and their local evaluator have different kinds of relationships, but we're sort of speaking in generalities here. Again, OSAP is expecting communication from you as the community, as opposed to the local evaluator. And, finally, this conducting evaluation for DWI, DFC, or other programs without appropriate compensation and contracting, just like you wouldn't want like an increase in your scope of work, the scope creep. It's so easy because evaluators care so deeply about the communities. It's so easy to like do one thing and then all of a sudden you're doing all the things. So, at the state level, we try to keep an eye out for our local evaluators too, that, they have a reasonable scope of work as well. If you need them to do additional things, then it is possible to contract them additionally for those things as well. And other communities have done that. And if you have any questions about that, certainly reach out to Liz or Christina or I, and we can, put you in touch with, some examples of that, how that's worked successfully. So there is a 20% minimum for local evaluators. It's been a long-standing requirement for local evaluators where where your money from OSAP, 20% should go to an LE. That can include things like travel and benefits and compensation of their expertise. And so, we haven't really had a lot of like new local evaluators, like sort of like, but if their training is needed, some of that money can go to that training and that capacity building. So just so you know, kind of that the money is flexible for that. So we touched on this. We hope that everyone, and especially after this presentation, will understand, your role in collecting, entering data, and using that data. When we all contribute, there's greater buy-in and use of that data. And, with that, we're going to talk about, program evaluation and outcomes data as specifically different kinds of data we can collect and use in our communities. And I'll pass this on to, am I passing this on to you, Dave, you, Liz?
Me, I believe.
Okay. I'll pass this on to you.
Okay. So you've already seen a few definitions, and you will see more. But hopefully each of these definitions is helpful, and maybe in a little different way with different definitions. They get some of them are more specific, some of them are more general. This is pretty general around program evaluation. But there's two things I would note in what is on your screen at the moment in terms of that definition. The first is the very beginning of it, the systematic method for collecting information and using information, essentially, is what it's getting at. The systematic method, the key there is effectively, the way we organize our understanding of ourselves and our world, the way we relate that to other people is really through stories. And stories effectively are ways of tying information together. This happened and that happened, this led to that. That's effectively what a story is. It's tying information together. And what makes evaluation really important is that it brings a systematic approach to it. It's one that's based in the same sort of approach that's used in research, scientific method, to try to ensure that one is putting together information in a way that is valid and appropriate. One is using factual information and using it well to tell the story effectively. And so that's why I think evaluation is so important. It's that systematic nature of it to basically help improve and tell the stories well for ourselves and for others about what's happening and why it's making a difference or why it's not making a difference. That's evaluation. The second thing I'd emphasize is the very end of it. We've touched on this a little bit already, but it's the continuous program improvement part of it. That is, evaluation really, I think the most important thing with evaluation is its ability to help improve what's happening as it's happening. And that's really the role of evaluation. So it's not all that rewarding as an evaluator if you write a report that you may think is great and it may include some great information and then it just sits on a shelf and no one uses it. That's really, in my book, kind of a failure. A lot of the value of evaluation comes through just in conversations that I have as an evaluator with state people, with local people around what's happening, where hopefully the things that I'm able to bring to bear, the way my training and working with data, my experience with working with data is helpful and useful in making choices that lead to the best chances of programs being successful. And so that's the second part I'd emphasize about this.
It looks like Christina has a raised hand.
Yeah, I think with that, Dave, is sometimes in this work that the data and the story is valued, that sometimes we might not have the outcome of the percentage changing, or we captured X number of peoples, but just making those adjustments just because of the nature of the work that we do. I mean, it's okay, we didn't try this partner, let's try this partner instead of that partner, let's try this approach. So those kind of things that sometimes aren't captured like in reports or those kind of things, that is part of the story. I know that sometimes, again, with the environmental strategies and just the nature of the strategies that we have, we might not see the end result of the big changes in the percentages, but making those adjustments, I think, are part of the process and are part of the story. If we're readjusting and, in real time, that instead of one law enforcement agency, we're going to approach 3 of them or whatever the case is. But I just wanted to say that. So sometimes that this work, because it does take some time, we might not see those immediate percentages, and it's gonna get there. I mean, that is part of the story, is what I'm trying to say too, is that these minor adjustments are part of the bigger story that are going to eventually make some of those changes.
Yeah, exactly. That makes total sense. And I also, in what you're saying, I think it's the emphasis in a way on the dialogue around the information and how important that really is. I mean, I know you feel that way. I definitely feel that way, it's in that dialogue of thinking about what the information it does and doesn't tell us, thinking through then what some options might be based on that. that's where a lot of the real value of evaluation comes through that I see, and it's what I hear people say to me. So yeah, I think good point. All right, so on the screen, I think are some evaluation questions that are most commonly asked, or get at some of the things that evaluation helps with, some of the questions it helps address, contribute to. This is not in any way, shape, or form covering everything, that's for sure, but it covers a number of things. So like the first thing that's up here, what is the problem itself? Where is it located? Whom does it affect? All of that, gets at issues that are related to needs assessment, that often are on the front end, that about making those choices. And the key is evaluators are obviously have expertise in data collection and in working with data and understanding data. And so needs assessment is very much a part of what evaluators can and do contribute to. So that's represented here, I think, by that first thing. Second thing, what new, expanded, or modified strategies are likely to decrease the problem? That was mentioned earlier too. We were talking about how evaluators have training and background working with research, and research really is the strongest information that can help in selecting strategies, understanding research. So your local evaluator, as well as us as the PIRE team, can be really helpful in terms of thinking through what the research is pertaining to different strategies or approaches that you might be considering, and helping understand the underlying research, because sometimes research is not the easiest thing to understand, but the training that evaluators have can be really helpful in that regard. The next three are some of the core questions that are most often thought of as what evaluators do. Reaching its intended population, is it being implemented well? Is the strategy effective? Those are some very common things. And then the final one gets at cost effectiveness, which is a very particular form of evaluation. And the people who are best at that really are people who have training specifically in that, and that's what they do, is essentially economic evaluation, weighing costs and benefits. And so all of these are some of the most common evaluation questions, and there are many, many others. So yeah, we can go on. And what this slide gets at in a bit of a playful way is that issue of telling the story well. And it's again, I mentioned this, we tell the story for ourselves, trying to understand what's going on, what we should be thinking about, what would make sense, how this makes sense to us, and what we should be doing differently. But we also tell the story of our work to other people. And some of those people are skeptical of the work we do. So in this picture, we have a picture of Liz's dad with Liz peeking around the side. Honestly, this could be my dad just as well. Liz's dad was an accountant. My dad was a banker, and they, I think, share in common a proclivity to really only appreciate government spending when they believe that those dollars are being used very efficiently and effectively. That's the kind of government that they can support, but they're very skeptical of government spending in general, and they need to believe that the money is being used effectively and for good reason. And that's where the data can be most helpful in helping folks like Liz's dad and my dad understand and appreciate that the reason for doing certain things is not just because it feels good to somebody, but because there's evidence that it's an effective use, an efficient use of resources to improve our lives. So I will then pass it, I think, back to Ashley, right?
Sure, or go ahead if you want to.
Well, no, I believe it's
sure. So, here we're just, we attempted another joke, be like John Cusack, follow a proven evidence-based program with fidelity. So, we're looking for a direct service or curriculum-based program with too few sessions, too many or too few students, or sessions are off topic, right? So, we're not wanting that. We're not wanting, we want to make sure that people implementing the strategy are properly trained, that the environmental strategy does not go off message or off the policy goal, and that we're keeping all of the core components of the evidence-based program, you know, and that's really what we mean with fidelity, is that, you know, and how a local evaluator can be helpful with you to sort of, you know, notice if any of these things are happening. But, you know, when something is found to be evidence-based, it's tested in that exact way. And so even though it might not be possible to do it exactly the same way in a different context, right? Because we know our communities are unique and different, we want to implement it as closely as we can. And there's some adaptations that are completely okay to make, and others that threaten the fidelity of the intervention. And so those, you know, you definitely want to discuss with your local evaluator.
Ashley, let me make one more point about that. This is one of the kind of core values that we have in the development of the WISE document and the benchmarks and the benchmark indicators. And so knowing that environmental strategies, there's no curriculum or rule book, mostly just literature to kind of help us understand how these might be best implemented. We developed the WISE document so that we can make sure that the core elements of fidelity are in there. And as we've been talking about all along, especially with environmental strategies, the environment, the community, the social issues, political issues change and shift. And so you also need to be, we need to be all kind of accountable to the fact that those fidelity issues might also change. But I just wanted to make sure that you all understood as well that fidelity is embedded in the WISE document in particular.
Yeah, thanks, Liz, for that reminder. You know, we also want to make sure that evidence is reliable, meaning the degree to which the result of the measurement, calculation, or specification can be depended on to be accurate. So, you know, we want something that we can repeat. So, for example, with the New Mexico Community Survey, you know, we do say, unless you have a good reason not to do so, you know, go back and do recruitment at the same place or the same kinds of places where you've been successful in the past. You know, have the same kind of strategy. If you've wanted to collect data from a specific population and you've done so in a specific way, you know, consider keeping as much the same as it makes sense for your community. So, you know, you want something that's repeated so that when you're comparing year to year, it's as much like you can have. I mean, a whole year has passed and some years are bigger than other years in terms of change, right? So, you know, the data we saw in 2019 versus 2020, you know, there was a pretty big, you know, societal change there. So, but in general, you want to keep as many variables the same as you can. So, you know, looking at where your data came from, how it was collected, and whether the data are representative of the target population of your work. Like again, with the community survey, you know, you may intentionally be sampling folks, marginalized communities within your population, and that's okay, but you want to do that in a consistent way. Evaluating the impact annually, can you collect it again? So for example, we generally discourage you from doing recruitment at one-time community health fairs, things like that. If it's an annual event, that's great. But you want to look for something that's as replicable as you can. And, you know, all of these questions really require that your evaluator and that you have a knowledge of evidence or research-based prevention science. Again, you know, you're implementing programs. That's not, you know, we don't expect you to be an expert in that, but just having that, encouraging that conversation, having that conversation with your local evaluator can be really helpful. All right. So, you know, and I think because this is a small group, I think we could just do this in the group that we have. But we want to talk about the strengths and limitations of each means to evaluate. And we just picked this randomly, a responsible beverage service or RBS program. So we've got some boxes in here and on the slide, and looking at these, we want you to kind of look through them and then take yourself off mute and maybe pick one and tell us what you think the strengths and limitations of them are. We'll maybe do like 2 or 3 of these.
Well, I see one, the anonymous surveys of bar staff regarding whether or not they serve to minors or the intoxicated.
Mhm.
So it's if we're talking about pros and cons, I mean, it's good that we are surveying anonymously to get the best information that we can, but also it would be really you wouldn't really think that even if it's an anonymous survey that somebody admitting or actually being truthful about serving serving alcohol to minors or over serving the population in general would be something that they would want to really admit to or talk about. So I mean, I've had the same sort of reservations with the NMCS survey as well, but I see a couple of at least one pro and one con in that. I think that it would be good information to have, and that there's an incentive that it's anonymous, so that hopefully you're getting truthful information. But I'm just wondering, like, the amount of truth in that response.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point, and bonus points for covering more than one box here. Thank you. Yes, anytime you ask someone, you're limited by self-report. So what I hear you saying is that there's like some stigma that people might not want to admit. The anonymous part of that box will help some with the stigma, but people may not. There's the stigma. And then there's sort of the realization that you're doing it. And there may be other ways, for example, going in to a bar and doing observations of servers serving folks. There might be other ways to get at the behavior doesn't have some of the limitations of self-report. So, sort of the point is that there's pros and cons to all of these approaches. And I appreciate you stepping out there and elucidating some of those pros and cons for this particular example. One more. Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing. I think that another thing is I like that you brought up observations, because I mean, if you're a bartender for X amount of years, it's really kind of like almost it's going to happen that you might, or it's likely that it would happen if you would serve to somebody or overserve somebody, whether that's accidental or you're just busy or whatever. So the likelihood of that happening, so the person may put on the survey like, no, I've never done that. But in your observance, you can maybe make the observation yourself, this person is intoxicated and they're serving. So yeah, I think that if you're a bartender over X amount of years, it's just very likely that you would either by happenstance maybe serve to a minor, however that happens, or definitely in my head serve to somebody who may have already had a little bit too much to drink and is just hiding it very well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Anybody want to take on one of the other boxes? Can't see you, so I can't stare you down.
Oh, I was gonna say the one about enforcement data from local authorities regarding violations of alcohol service laws. That was kind of like one of the questions the things you were talking about earlier is like having them self-identify. I guess a pro of that would be that you're working with your local law enforcement agency to collect the data, which is, we all really like for them to help with that. But then also it might be also what you're saying, an under-reporting of the what's going on. And we all live and work in our communities, and we see some things that happen that aren't reported and things like that. So it's really good to work with them, but then also it might be underreported in our communities.
Excellent. Yep. You notice I didn't say, which one of these are good and which one are bad, right? they all have pros and cons, and they're better or less well suited for the particular question that you're asking. So I appreciate that. And I am going to pass the baton over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Liliet Gonzalez.
Okie dokie. So thank you for that previous exercise, Ashley. It kept me thinking. I just wanted to say that, and I think that this might kind of help move us into the slide too. I was working in another project related to a responsible beverage service program, and they sent in pseudo-intoxicated people after the bars had received the training, and all of the bars failed the pseudo-intox. And so we were asked by the program to review the training materials to see if the training materials were accurate, and how to improve the training materials. But the contribution of the evaluation team was to say, we think it's not the training materials, so that we were going back to the components, the core components that are necessary for an RBS program. And part of it is making sure that there's also enforcement, making sure that there's compliance across the board, and that people are incentivized to follow the laws. So this is also to say that many programs do involve, well, all programs, we are living and working in a cultural world, which also invites ideology. And some of the things that Ashley talked about at the beginning, I think are really important to mention when we think about the Just Say No and how it influenced a lot of us who are working in prevention, and a lot of us growing up. You definitely aged us there, Ashley, but I definitely also grew up in that time. But I do think that it has, I mean, through the years, as I collect data, do focus groups, do interviews with people in communities, thinking about how to address substance use problems, we very often get back to that kind of just say no kind of thinking. And it wasn't just Nancy Reagan who came up with that. That was a product of our national way of thinking. We often think that people just need to have somebody needs to tell them to say no. And if people just said no, we would not have substance use problems. I think that those of us who have been working for a long time in substance use prevention are keenly aware of the fact that it's not about that. So we can build resiliency skills, we can build resistance skills among youth in particular. But it's just to kind of reinforce this part about what's really important about evaluation is understanding the cultural context, understanding the cultural values of the people that you're working with, and how ideology may take effect. So people often do not know why they behave the way they do. So asking people who use drugs, well, why do you use drugs? And thinking that you're going to find a solution to that from that question is not necessarily a direct path. It's really important for us to understand why people think that they use substances, their rationales, their explanatory, contexts, but it does not provide the direct answer. And, one of the things that I often talk about this is when we think about the perception of risk of consequences. So I think we don't like to think about bringing in law enforcement every time that somebody wants to use a substance. That's not what preventionists are about. But what we can do is bring in the concept in certain circumstances, especially with regulated substances like tobacco, alcohol, that the people who are providing access to those drugs might receive consequences if they provide that access. So that's kind of where we come in when we're thinking about intervening variables and the role of culture and our role in evaluation and in understanding cultural values is to understand how the community thinks about these particular issues. Are they terrified of law enforcement? Are they sure that law enforcement, if they come in, are going to get them for something entirely different? So our role as evaluators and as people thinking through evaluation needs to be along those lines. So in American culture, generally, there is an idea that every action is a result of a conscious decision. And I think that we can all think that it's important that we understand that there are other factors that motivate our behavior. And I think that Ashley often, as we look at just one more point about the role of culture, when we look at the community survey, I think it's really important for you to ask your local evaluator to pull those results that are from the question 40 or whatever it is that we have, that the qualitative response, I think that is a really good sounding board for community members to communicate to you what's really important to them about substance use. And she's been able to track some of these trends throughout the state in terms of what people have to say about certain substances, about consequences, about who's to blame. And I think that part of the community survey is just as important for us to kind of have a sounding board. So with that said, and acknowledging the next slide for our next activity, what do you think, Ashley? Do we do this as a group too, where we kind of walk through these questions instead of doing small groups?
Well, let me ask Tanya. How difficult, if I put everybody in a small group, is that going to mess up anything that you're doing on your end with the recording?
I don't think it should. I think we can still go.
Okay, Liz, why don't you
Okay.
explain the activity, and then we'll put people in groups of maybe 3 or 4.
Okay, I take a close look at this slide and some of these questions. So one of you quickly decides if you're going to be the facilitator and ask these questions of yourselves. And we'll take about 15 minutes and then we'll come back and report back. So think about your community and what kind of words do people in your community use when it comes to substance use? Try not to think about your professionals that you work with in your field, but think about like if people like your neighbors, your family, people that may not have the professional background that you do in substance use, but so do people use words like addict? Do they use words like alcoholic? Do they so what druggie? What kind of words do they use in reference to substance use, even if they are stigmatizing or positive? So what kind of language do so that's important for you to understand. The next question is, what do people think will change substance use patterns in your community? And is this different than how you or your coalition or agency sees it? So this is kind of getting at the tension between what some of our evidence-based practices are and then what the community thinks needs to happen. And often our job is to figure out how to kind of marry those two and make them speak to one another. And then what kind of evidence do you think will help you convince your community about the effectiveness of your prevention program? And then what are some of the cultural values shared in your coalition or agency or community about substance use? And what do you think you know, and what would you like to know? So if any of you have ever, thank you, Dave, for putting that in there. So that's in the chat, those questions. There are a lot of questions, but even if you're able to kind of focus in on 1 or 2 of those sections, we can probably have a nice, complete response.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thanks, Liz. So what I have done is I'm going to let you choose which breakout group you'd like to join. And so I have this by, and then Pirate Team, feel free, because this was kind of off the cuff. So these are not mutually exclusive. You know, people will fit in perhaps more than one, but I've split this particular one up by urban, rural, suburban, and tribal communities. Again, I don't think that these are mutually exclusive. For example, tribal communities could be urban, rural, or suburban. But just, you know, kind of based on the kinds of communities and the differences in the communities that I've read about in the, you know, in the mid-year reports, because that's fresh on my mind. Join one of them that seems most relevant to you. And then I will go back and look and make sure there's not, you know, everybody in one group or in one person in another group. You know, we'll figure out some kind of way. So if you're flexible with that, if with me moving you, then I think we can all choose which group we think might be most helpful to us. Okay, any questions? So you'll choose your own room. You'll be prompted to choose your own room in just a minute. Thoughts, questions as a big group before you move to small groups?
Hey, Ashley,
Yeah.
would you like me to, do I need to rename the groups to the like tribal, urban, and rural, or should I just leave it as room 1, room 2, room 3?
I've already done it, and I'm going to initiate the breakout groups.
Perfect.
All right, I'm opening now. Angelica, are you having trouble joining a group?
Ashley, would you like for us to stop recording and record again, or keep?
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's just stop it for this like